After his training with the legendary warrior Queen Scar in Alba, Cuchulainn returned to Ireland and married his beloved Emer, who was the only woman in all of Ireland that was his equal. The two people had a happy marriage, for they loved each other dearly, and even though Cuchulainn wasn't always faithful when he was on his adventures, and Emer knew about that, she was never jealous, for she knew that his heart truly belonged to her, and that he would always return to her. But that was about to change. It was one time during the celebrations of Samhain that the Red Branch warriors of Ulster and their families gathered at the court of Croagh Mac Nessa. To honor the traditions of their forefathers, the people started a huge bonfire, and the warriors told each other tales of their adventures. But since on this day the veil between the worlds was at its thinnest, and the other world therefore was closer to ours than at any other day, rumor had it that any man who was so foolish to tell a lie on this very day would have its own sword cry out against him. So, while the men boasted about their victories, they could be sure that every word was true. It also happened on this day that Cuchulainn was amongst the people that had gathered, and he joined his uncle's advisor, the poet Seneca, in a game of Fichel. A game Cuchulainn was particularly skilled in. They were biding the time until all of the invited guests would arrive, and of course, Cuchulainn seemed to have the upper hand. But while they were still waiting and playing, a flock of beautiful white birds landed near the nearby lake, and all of the women gathered were in awe for their unique beauty. They all wanted to possess a creature of such beauty, but their men were unable to catch them for them. And so Cuchulainn's own wife Emer stepped up to him, and before everyone announced that her husband would catch those birds for them, and be it just to make her happy. Cuchulainn was annoyed at this demanding request. Why should he get up from his game just to catch some birds? He sighed, drew his sword, and threw it in a great arc, knocking every single bird down without killing even one. He then went to the birds, picked them up, and gave every woman in Ulster 2 of them, until every woman had the desired creatures. Every woman but one, for he was 2 birds short, and didn't have any left for his own wife, Emer. He apologized to his wife half-heartedly, for she made him do it in the first place, and this would be a good lesson for her not to demand anything so stupid from him in front of everyone. But Emer knew that it wasn't quite right of her to ask him like that, and so she said she didn't mind, and apologized for her request. But then, Cuchulainn was upset. Despite him wanting to teach Emer a lesson, he couldn't help but feel sorry that every woman in Ulster would have those birds but his own. He swore to bring her the most beautiful birds with the most soothing voices to call her own. Coincidentally, only a short time later, he saw 2 of the most beautiful birds flying towards the lake, mysteriously chained together by a red golden band. He quickly took a slingshot, and despite the warnings of Seneca that these birds seemed to be enchanted and better not to be disturbed, he flung a stone at them and missed. It was the first time in his life that he had missed a shot. How could that be? And even though the people around him kept warning him not to disturb these otherworldly creatures, he took a second stone, flung it and missed again. This made him angry. How could those simple birds dodge his shots? He instead took a spear, flinging it at them, and this time hit one of the birds. But still, The birds didn't came down. No, he was proper angry. Defeated by birds. Him, the prized warrior. Angry at his own failure, he took off, went to the nearby standing stone, sat down, and took a nap. And then he had the strangest dream. In it, he met two of the most beautiful and graceful women he had ever seen. One of them came to him smiling, the other one crying. And while he still tried to make some sense out of the situation, the smiling woman took out a whip and struck him. While he was still processing what just happened, the crying woman started smiling and also whipped him. And while Cuchulainn was unable to defend himself, the two women took turns and whipped him over and over again, until he was closer to death than to life, and they finally left him alone. Cuchulainn awoke, still lying under the standing stone. But what happened couldn't have been just a dream, for his whole body was covered in bruises, and he was barely able to get up. The warriors of the Red Branch had to help him to get to his home and finally to his sickbed. And even though the fairy blood he inherited from his father Lu usually helped him to heal a bit quicker than other men, this time those ominous bruises stayed for nearly a whole year, until Emer wasn't able to watch him suffer anymore. She went to Croa mac Nessa and shamed him and all of the men of Ulster for doing nothing about Cuchulainn's condition. Would it have been one of them, he surely would have searched earth and sky for a cure, and the one responsible for those injuries. He wouldn't have slept or eaten until he would have been able to help his friends and comrades. And what have they done during the course of a whole year? Nothing. And while the warriors let the feeling of shame sink in, she went back to her husband's sickbed and sang for him a sweet melody. She told him of all the great deeds he had done as the greatest hero of Ulster. And slowly he remembered, and a little bit of his old strength came back into his body, enough to finally leave the sickbed and tell the others what he had seen in this terrible dream a year ago. Among the warriors listening to Cuchulainn was the druid Carvat, who listened carefully and deduced that those must have been women from the Sidhe of the other world. He told Cuchulainn that it was their doing that he was still sick after all this time, and that the only way to get better was to return to the place where it all began, and to bargain with them. Fearing even worse punishments, Cuchulainn went back to the Standing Stone at Samhain, accompanied by Carvat, and both men walked into a dream together to speak to the good people. As soon as they stepped into the dream, they found the woman who had smiled at him in his last dream. She introduced herself as Liban, and told Cuchulainn that the other one's name from his last dream was Fand, the wife of Manannán mac Lir, the god of the oceans and the sea. They had tried to reach Cuchulainn in the shape of birds to ask for his help, but when he started to throw stones at them, and even injured Fand through his spear, they felt so insulted that they had to punish him. It just happened that Fand, who had heard of Cuchulainn and had watched him for a while, had fallen in love with him. And when they came to him, they wanted to give Fand to him as a wife, for Manannán mac Lir had deserted her, and her heart longed for Cuchulainn. She told Cuchulainn that there indeed was a way to lift the sickness put on him, but that she needed his help, and would only lift the sickness and also give Fand to him as a wife if he would agree to help her. Her own husband, Lowry of the Quicksword, would have to face a battle against impossible odds, and she feared that he had no chance of winning. And so She wanted Cuchulainn to come with her to the Plain of Light and to win the battle for him. Cuchulainn was all but happy about the idea of being dragged into the affairs of the Sidhe. But what choice did he really have? And so he asked his faithful charioteer Lake to follow the birds first and check out the situation. When Lake returned from the Plain of Light, where he had the chance to meet this ominous Fand, he confirmed everything that Liban had told Cuchulainn in his dream. He didn't fail to mention the beauty of Fand, and also the armies that were ready for the battle Liban had spoken about. The odds were dire. But again, what choice did he have? And so, he agreed to Liban's request and followed her to the Plain of Light. When he approached the warriors of the Sidhe, they all laughed at him, for they thought him mad, never having heard of him before. But they promptly changed their minds when Cuchulainn approached one of their kings and slew him in single combat. Dozens of warriors followed their king, until the warriors were convinced that this was no madman at all, but a strong warrior. And thus, Lowry Quicksword's battle was won, and Cuchulainn spent another month in the Otherworld, enjoying his time with Fand as his wife. When the month was over, he knew he had to return to Ulster and to Emer, for everyone would be sick of sorrow for him, and he had to do his duties. He promised Fand not to forget her, and to meet her at a certain yew tree on Baile Strand, before he took off, returning to our realm. Back home he had to tell what he had seen, and though the men of the Red Branch were impressed, Emer was furious. She couldn't believe that after everything she had done for him, he would just run off with a fairy woman, leaving her alone. She refused to let that happen. This was the first time she truly was jealous. For this time she was sure once Cuchulainn followed Fand, she would lose him forever. And so she gathered 50 women of Ulster around her, armed them with knives, and went to Baile's beach to meet this ominous fairy and end this affair. The two newlywed lovers were already there when the horde of angry women arrived at the strand. When Fand saw them, she was terrified. Without thinking, Cuchulainn took a stand in front of her, to shield her from whatever would come. But despite this, Fand and Emer screamed at each other, calling each other names. Cuchulainn tried to convince Emer not to hurt Fand, for if she attacked her, who was under his protection, by honor he had to fight her. Emer scolded him for what he was doing to her, until Cuchulainn felt deep remorse. He never meant to hurt her, and in the end he promised to stay with Emer, causing Fand to cry again. Again, a man she loved left her. Again, she would be alone. But as soon as her salty tears met the waters of the lake, her wailing was heard by her first husband, Manannan mac Lir, and he realized how much he still loved her, despite everything that had happened between them. Only moments later he appeared just next to her. He took a moment and then asked her if she was able to forgive him, and if put to the choice, whether she would choose Cuchulainn or himself. Fand admitted that both men were equally good men, but that Cuchulainn already had an equal partner, while Manannan had not. And so she chose Manannan. And even though this response didn't satisfy Manannan mac Lir, both descended into the depths of the water, back to their home, never to bother Cuchulainn and Emer again. but not before Manannan used his magical cloak between Fand and Cuchulainn to ensure that this would be the last time they saw each other. But this also meant they left behind a broken marriage, for Cuchulainn still loved Fand, and Emer still felt betrayed by her husband. Both were devastated, and so they argued and argued until they affected all of Ulster with their mood. This called Carwat back on the plan, and he decided to give both of them a special potion. A potion that would make them forget everything that happened since last year's Samhain, so that they could be happy again together. Emer and Cuchulainn willingly drank the potion, and instantly forgot about their quarrels. Their marriage was back to the happy state from before last Samhain, and Ulster went back to a state of harmony. And that was the story about the only time Emer had ever gotten jealous about another woman. If you liked the story, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe. And ring the bell to be notified when the next episode comes out. See you next time. Slan slan.